Good evening and greetings from Kotak Securities. We're delighted to welcome you to the webinar of Opportunity in Mindspace Business Parks REIT. I'll take a few moments to introduce our speaker, Shailin Shabnani, Head Real Estate Kotak Investment Banking. He has a bachelor's degree in commerce and a chartered accountant by education who has over 15 years of experience in investment banking. He's with Kotak Group from past 10 years. Currently, he's heading the real estate advisory practice at Kotak's Diamond Public and private sectors. We welcome you, sir.
Thanks a lot, and welcome everyone. And thank you for taking the time out to understand about REITs in general and about Mindspace REIT in specific. So I'll start with a quick overview about REITs as a product, and would like to give you a quick background that REITs globally are a very established vehicle. About $2 trillion of REITs trade globally. What we'll do is I'll run you through a presentation which will outline what a REIT is, how does a REIT get formed, what are the nuances and the investment characteristics of this product, and thereafter get into a quick background about the first REIT that got listed, and thereafter talk about the Mindspace REIT, which is got listed recently. So with this, let me take this ahead, and I will now share a presentation. I hope this is visible. Just give me 1 second. I will just share the presentation now. Okay, so I hope this is visible, and let me get started with this. Okay. So to give a quick perspective about REIT as a product, in terms of the instrument characteristics, this is effectively a hybrid instrument carrying the nature of both returns that a fixed income instrument, like say a fixed deposit or a debt mutual fund could provide, and in addition also provide equity characteristics through unit price appreciation. Broadly, if you were to merge these two options, it is actually quite similar to buying a direct asset that one could own and put on rent. Clearly, there are a number of disadvantages when it comes to ownership of an asset individually, and hence REITs provide a good avenue for investing in grade A assets which are rent yielding, typically have diversified pool of assets, and one is able to benefit from the underlying rent which gets paid periodically, and also benefit from the appreciation that comes in the unit prices on account of growth that one witnesses in rents, which is organic and hence translates into unit price growth. And in addition, REITs as a vehicle could also grow through inorganic routes, which is also an additional form of growth that is available. So with this, just have a quick snapshot about the structure of a REIT. If you look at the way REITs get formed, presently assets are owned of the assets that are relevant for being included in a REIT are typically owned through company structures, which we are referring to as SPVs here. Those SPVs are held by individual asset owners, and these get swapped into units of a REIT, and that's how a REIT gets created. Upon the REIT getting created, the REIT also does an IPO, where it could do a primary issuance of units to public shareholders, or there could be an offer for sale similar to what one sees in listed equities. There is an external manager that manages REITs, and that is in context of how the Indian regulations are made for governing and managing of REITs. Additionally, there is an independent trustee who holds the assets, in benefit, or as a beneficiary for the unit holders. Talk about a quick snapshot of the regulatory framework that is relevant to REITs. So REITs are supposed to be vehicles which do not take development risk beyond the, the development risk can be taken up to a limited threshold. Let's put it that way. So 80% of the value of assets need to be completed and rent yielding. That's a basic bare minimum threshold that has been specified by SEBI for a qualifying asset framework on an overall basis. Additionally, REITs are not allowed to take leverage beyond 49%. Leverage above 25% requires unit holder approval. The REIT management entity, which we described in the slide before, is subject to identical corporate governance standards as would be applicable to listed companies with a 50% independent board. Additionally, an important framework that has been built in the Indian REIT context is that the manager entity can be removed by approval of 60% of the unrelated unit holders. And all of this effectively brings about strong alignment of the asset management entity. REITs are also required to distribute a minimum of 90% of the distributable cash flows. And additionally, there are related party safeguards that are built in for any transactions that may be taken up by the REIT post listing. So all in all, it's a very strong framework that has been developed by SEBI. This has taken a reasonable amount of time. A lot of thought has gone to it, and all the regulators, particularly SEBI, have been very mindful of building a framework which protects the interests of the unit holders, particularly the non-institutional retail unit holders. This is a quick snapshot of the current REIT market. We presently have two listed REITs, Embassy and Mindspace. In terms of total area under management by both the REITs, Embassy has 33.3 million square foot, as Mindspace has 29.5 million square foot. In the context of the total office stock of the country, which is about 600 odd million square foot, this effectively represents about 4 to 5% each of the office stock of the country. So therefore, these are very sizable REITs, and Embassy and Mindspace in that order happen to be the largest REITs in Asia by area. A common characteristic to both the REITs is that they are prevalent. The portfolios are based in key Indian cities. There is a strong MNC tenant roster. The occupancy rates are high, which is above 92%, and they're characterized with high tenant retention rates. All of this comes in the backdrop of fairly low average per square foot rents. In the case of Mindspace, it is 52 rupees per square foot and 68 rupees for Embassy. And in terms of collection trends, if you were to look at even in the post-COVID environment, both Embassy and Mindspace have collected between 97 to 98% of the rental. I think with this, we'll probably just talk about how Embassy delivered its yield in the last year, which was the first full completed year. So that one has reference therefore when one talks about Mindspace as we progress ahead. So the dividend yield that was distributed was higher than all the other products that are otherwise available in the context of the Indian markets. And if one looks at the share price, the charts basically talk about since the day of listing till June 30th. But if you were to look at the stock price till as of yesterday, the total return, including the distribution, was about 32.4%. And the distribution for FY20 on the IPO price was 8.1%. So in terms of yield, these are fairly robust yields that one is able to participate in, and hence the instrument also is fairly relevant in that context. Now we'll just get into Mindspace REIT, which has listed recently. Talk about the background of the sponsors. So this comes from the House of K. Raheja Corporation, who have 4 decades of experience in real estate. They are one of the largest and most diversified real estate groups in the country. The office platform, which got listed under the Mindspace brand as Mindspace Business Parks, has about 29.5 million square foot of total portfolio. We'll get into more details on that later. Outside of the office platform, they listed their hospitality vertical under Chalet Hotels brand last year. They also have an existing listed company called Shopper Stop. So we are very familiar, and the markets are very familiar with both of these listed entities. And in addition to these listed entities, the group also has presence in retail segment with 6 operating malls under the Inorbit brand, and residential development also, which has been carried out in multiple cities. So that's a quick snapshot of the group. And moving ahead into the portfolio, so Mindspace REIT portfolio, as I said, is 29.5 million square foot, of which 23 million square foot is completed as of the document date that was filed recently. And this portfolio operates at a 92% occupancy on the completed area of 23 million square foot. Additionally, in terms of the valuation, which was part of the filing documents recently, the total area, the total value was represented by the total value that was represented by completed assets was 94%. So as I said earlier, REITs are fairly mature vehicles, and again, the SEBI stipulation of 80% that has to be represented by completed assets. In the case of Mindspace, 94% of their value, as per the valuation report, was represented by completed assets. Post-COVID environment, they have consistently collected rents, even in this kind of environment where 97.5% of collections talks about the resilient business model. The portfolio has additional levers, which I will probably talk a bit about. In addition, one final point on this page is that post-issue, the portfolio is characterized by low leverage at about 15.5%. And in this environment, that bodes very well, especially when financing is difficult to come. This is a great format where you have a low leveraged vehicle, where you are able to maximize your leverage on lenders and get benefits in terms of fine pricing. This is a quick snapshot of the key portfolio assets. Mindspace Madhapur in Hyderabad, which is 10.6 million square foot, is the largest business park in Hyderabad. Mindspace Airoli East in Mumbai region, which is in Navi Mumbai, at 6.8 million square foot, is the largest business park in Mumbai region. Additionally, in Airoli West, the Mindspace business park of 4.5 million square foot. If one adds the Airoli East and Airoli West in Navi Mumbai, that is above 11 million square foot of space. So on an aggregate basis, that just talks about the presence that the group has in the Mumbai region. Then there are 2 assets in Pune, which are in Kharadi and Yerwada, operating under the Commerce Zone brand, which are 2.6 million square foot and 1.7 million square foot. A key point to note here is that these are large gated communities, community kind of developments, where you have large footprints in which a lot of buildings have been office buildings have been developed. They're tenanted by high quality MNC tenants, and there is further development potential in these parks. So when we even talk about additional development potential in these kind of assets, it effectively is not speculative in nature and is within the fence and in part of locations that are already developed and established. In addition to this portfolio, there are 5 independent assets which are high quality assets in key micro markets. If I were to describe those, there is Commerce Zone Porur in Chennai, which is 0.8 million square foot. Paradigm Mindspace Malad, which is in Mumbai western suburbs, is 0.7 million square foot. There is a 1 lakh square foot development in BKC, which is the Square. And there are additional developments in Nagar Road in Pune at 0.7 million square foot, and Mindspace Pochuram in Hyderabad, which is 1 million square foot. So this together represents a collection of assets, 5 large-scale office parks and 5 independent buildings. All of these are high-quality Grade A office assets, which have very strong tenant, profile. While on this page, I can just illustrate a few of the tenants. So some of the large tenants in this platform include Accenture, Qualcomm, JP Morgan, UBS, Schlumberger, Amazon, etc. And hence, if one looks at this kind of a diversified tenant profile, that kind of a tenant profile provides the strength that insulates this portfolio from the current uncertainties that surround the market, including the general office segment, right? And therefore, these portfolios, and Mindspace in particular, remains insulated on a relative basis to the general market. These are key facts about the portfolio. So we talked about the tenant portfolio, tenant base, which is 84.9% of the tenants is comprised of by foreign multinational clients. About 39.5% of the rents come from Fortune 500 companies. The top 10 tenants represent about 41.5% of the total rents. In terms of the average portfolio rents, this is at 51.8 rupees or just under 52 rupees, whereas the market rents in these portfolios locations are 63.5 rupees, which provide a mark-to-market potential of 22.6%. To illustrate, the reason for this difference is when leases have been signed at a point historically, contractual escalations are typically 4.5-5% annually or 15% in 3 years. And over a period of time, market rents have grown faster than these contractual escalations, resulting in this kind of a mark-to-market potential. So when a lease comes up for expiry at the end of a 9-year contract tenure, that's a typical contract tenure, there is ability to reprice this contract and achieve this kind of a mark-to-market potential. If I were to talk about this kind of experience in the past, in the last 3 years, which is April 17 to March 20, there was a total leasing that was done in this portfolio of 7.6 million square foot, of which 3 million square foot was releasing, which effectively represents contracts which expired. And on those contracts, an average of 28.9% of releasing spread was achieved. So versus a 22.6% that we see as a current mark-to-market potential, in this portfolio, the management has successfully demonstrated a 28.9% historical track record on achieving mark-to-market rent growth. In addition, of the 7.6 million square foot, 4.6 million square foot was on account of areas which were completed and freshly leased. Again, these were taken up by high quality tenants like an Atos, UBS, etc. And more importantly, if one were to look at the spread of tenants of the 3 million square foot that was released, which was at the end of a long-term contract expiry, 84.6% of the tenants renewed their leases, and at average rents, which we spoke about, where for the entire 3 million square foot of releasing, that accounted for a 28.9% kind of a markup. That just talks about the relevance that these tenants also place on the business that they are conducting from these parks, these spaces, and most of these tenants carry out captive operations, and hence these spaces continue to be relevant to the tenants. In addition, from April onwards till June of 2020, in this portfolio, the management has also been able to lease 0.7 million square foot, which is 7 lakh square foot of space. So even despite COVID, we are still seeing resilience, and areas which are completed are seeing reasonable amount of traction, and therefore one is able to see growth on account of that as well. Outside of this set of metrics, additionally, there are also assets which are not forming part of the initial portfolio of the REIT in Mindspace, and the reason for that is they were not included, since they would not have qualified for the completed threshold of 80%. These assets are currently under construction. Mindspace REIT has a right of first offer on these assets, and as and when these assets are completed and rented out, these will be offered to the REIT. As I said earlier, there are substantial safeguards built in for minority shareholders, where majority of minority will vote for these kind of asset acquisitions, and therefore it is something that will be in the control of minority shareholders to vote and bring a transaction like this into the fold of the REIT. In terms of the total potential, 8.6 million square foot of ROFO assets are currently being constructed, and then there are some more details which we can probably skip at this point. I'll just talk a bit about the returns, which is at the IPO price. So when we listed the Mindspace REIT, this was at a price of 275 rupees per unit. Considering the projected distributions for FY22 and FY23 at 1223 and 1306 crores, and I would like to specify that these projections are built on conservative assumptions, and therefore we are reasonably confident that these projections should be met with. At these projections, we are effectively talking about a cash yield of 7.5% for FY22, paid quarterly, and hence on a quarterly annualized basis at the IPO price of 275, this translates to 7.7%, and for FY23 this would translate to 8.3%. If we were to therefore talk about the total return, in fact most of that has already happened, right? But if you were to look at the construct of total return, we are effectively talking about yield that comes on a quarterly basis, which we are talking about 7.7% annualized. In addition to it, there is potential for capital appreciation, which we had currently forecasted at a 6.8% growth, which effectively was a difference between the FY23 and 22 yields. While we have talked about a 14.5% growth, we are already aware that the stock price is in the range of 300 rupees, which is currently trading, and it has been there since listing. So it's been a fairly robust listing, listed at about 11% premium. At this price, considering the FY22 distribution, this would work out to a pre-tax yield of about 6.8%. If we were to also look at post-tax yields from an investor standpoint, there are two kinds of flows that an investor would benefit from, which could be underlying dividends or interest. I will not get into details at the current moment on the distribution split. However, it will suffice to say that above 90% of the distributions are projected to be in the form of dividends, which are not taxable. There is a Section 10 exemption available in the Finance Act 20, under which there is an exemption for dividends from REIT instruments. The balance under 10% would be effectively in the form of interest, and if one were to take the maximum tax rate of 42%, that could be taxed at that level. Obviously, on the interest component would be taxed at the rate that an individual investor would be subjected to. However, that's how the taxation regime would work. So I think with this, I think we can complete our basic presentation, and we would be very happy to take any questions.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for all the insights. It was really insightful. I'd now like to introduce Akshay. Akshay, who heads the investment product practice at PCG. The response from our audience was overwhelming, and now Akshay will moderate these questions.
Sure. Thank you, Kratika. And there have been several questions around, the COVID situation, where people have been asking that, given the current work from home scenario, what is the outlook on commercial properties going forward?
Sure, Akshay, that's a very valid question. Something that came about very regularly. So there are two aspects to this question. This will be a slightly longish answer, but I think it will benefit everyone who's interested to understand the impact on this segment, and therefore trying to figure out how to price this instrument. So I'll just break this up. So if you look at the current demographic of employee that works, and let's look at it from the from that segment. Typically, you have an employee who has migrated from his or her home, which is in a small town, going to a Bangalore, to a Chennai, to a Navi Mumbai, Hyderabad, etc. Most of these employees would end up therefore staying in PGs or shared accommodation, where there is limited infrastructure that is available. Internet bandwidth in India, I think we are ranked somewhere in the 60th to 70th in terms of the speed of internet. So the lack of physical infra, the lack of internet bandwidth, confidentiality concerns do not make it a very easy affair for companies and employees both to continue to operate on an extended work from home kind of a format. While we have all grown more used to working from home, on a long-term basis, one must also bear in mind that many of these companies, which typically have an IT kind of employee framework, there will also be attrition, and the social connect that one started out with at the beginning of this pandemic, which enabled people to work from home effectively, will be lost over a period of time. So as efficacy of teams starts reducing, people will definitely want to come back to offices. In addition, these kind of office parks have a host of amenities like food courts, gyms, creches, parks, etc. And the employees who work in these kind of spaces are used to these facilities, enjoy these facilities, and today you are basically setting up an employee, say who work, 6 engineers in a 3 BHK is clearly not a very conducive way of working, over a long term. So if one were to look at from a tenant and from an employee standpoint, it is only the current pandemic which is forcing people to stay in. People are also social animals, and therefore our assessment is that people are looking to actually go back to offices at the first available opportunity, subject to safety being monitored. So we do not see a long-term trend impacting the office segment because of work from home. I'd also like to take on the second subject, which is what is the long-term impact on the office space outlook hence. And if we were to look at the current office space market of about 600 million square foot, there was a recent report by one of the IPCs which talked about a 6 million square foot vacancy in the last 6 months. Incidentally, in the same period, there was 12 million square foot of space that got taken up. Having said that, even if we were to ignore that, that's an additional 1% vacancy across the top 6 or 7 markets in the country. Taking that into cognizance, and bearing in mind that this kind of a pandemic has happened once in 100 years, right? It just talks about the fact that India is very resilient. Indian office market is very resilient. The reason for that is that the companies who are operating in India, they have global captives which are relevant to their relevant and operating as a backbone to their global operations, and therefore continue to be relevant. The Indian rents are at a fraction of the rental cost overseas, and more importantly, the talent base that these companies have actually come to India in search of. One, it's not available to the scale that India offers, and also the cost arbitrage that India offers of this kind of talent. You get talent in India at a fraction of the cost. Ultimately, economics will prevail. Companies will therefore continue to find India as a relevant market. Indian rents are low, and there are enough physical and other bottlenecks on infrastructure which will not allow work from home effectively to be a very efficient way of working on a long-term basis. So on a overall basis, hence, we do not believe, while there will be definitely some impact, but it is not something that will have a material impact going ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Shalin. Another question is that, what is the horizon that one should be looking at, while investing in a REIT, typically, and in particular in case, for Mindspace, if there is a particular investment horizon that you have in mind?
Yeah, again, a valid question, Akshay. So the way I would think about it, REITs are best held with a horizon of 3 to 5 years. These are not a pop instrument. This is not like an equity instrument where you would want to flip it over. You buy it from a horizon of maximizing your yield on capital invested. Look at it as an allocation from or versus your fixed income products, which FDs would give you, say, about 5.5 odd %, and other yield instruments also do not give you this kind of a post-tax yield. So at the present moment, we would think it is a good idea to hold this with a 3 to 5 year horizon, and that would enable one to also get benefits of capital appreciation over a period of time.
Thank you. A couple of people have actually asked, why do REITs pay out in the form of dividends and interest, and how is the taxation in both?
Okay, so the reason REITs pay out in the form of interest, ideally one would prefer, like a normal company, for the payout to be entirely in the form of dividend. Yeah. But ultimately, it all boils down to the capital structure that a REIT may have formed. And I can give you a very simple example. If there is any primary issuance that a REIT does, right, there is no use for that capital in the REIT per se. That capital effectively is downstreamed into the SPVs in which there are loans, and those loans get repaid, and this money is effectively upstreamed by the SPV to the REIT in the form of interest. Given that REIT has received this inflow and also received dividends from the underlying SPV, these two inflows and REIT being a pass-through vehicle, these two inflows reflect identically in the hands of the unit holders. While the REIT will eventually pay out a dividend, the underlying color of the inflows at the REIT level will become relevant. So ultimately, it is all a function of capital structure, which makes the structure more efficient for the REIT, and that's why it could be more interest than dividend. As I said, in the case of Mindspace, above 90% is in the form of dividend, and about 10% or under 10% would be in the form of interest.
Sure. Thank you. A few questions have been regarding, the dividend yield, and at the present current market price of around 300 odd, what is the expected yield, and what is the expectation going on from here? Shailendra, you're on mute. Hello.
My apologies. At the current moment, I don't think I want to hazard a guess as to what is the future expected potential. But at the current moment, taking a price of 300 rupees, it works out to a pre-tax yield of just about 6.9%. And a post-tax yield, if one were to take the maximum tax rate of about 42% on the interest component, it would work out to about 6.7% post-tax.
Sure. A couple of questions have been around, between Embassy REIT and this one. How does the capital structure work out? If you can just explain the difference.
Sure. So if I were to go back and think about Embassy was a total IPO of 4,750 crores versus a 4,500 crore IPO in the case of Mindspace. So in terms of overall fundraising, it is not very different. However, in the case of Embassy, there was a larger primary issuance. 4,750 crores was virtually all primary, and that money was eventually hence downstreamed into the project SPVs or the asset SPVs, which use that money to repay loans. To that extent, as of the last year, broadly on account of this interest on loan that the REIT had given, about 40% of the flow that the REIT got was in the form of interest. And to that extent, if one were to compare Mindspace, the primary issue component in Mindspace was about 1,000 crores, net of cost that effectively gets downstreamed into the asset SPVs, and therefore the amount that comes up in the form of interest on that component is relatively smaller, and to that extent there is a difference. However, it would also be pertinent to note that in the recent earnings call, the Embassy REIT management has highlighted that the dividend plus the capital redemption portion of Embassy REIT for FY22 is expected to be 75% or in that ballpark range, relative to Mindspace, which for FY22, where the dividend component will be upwards of 90 odd percent. I hope that answers the capital structure question.
Sure. Thank you. Just a minute. So there are a couple of questions around, a lot of exposure being in the Mumbai area, and what are your outlooks? I think some bit of it you've already answered. In case, just if you can, spend a minute on that.
Yeah. So, if I were to look at three key markets where the portfolio is based out of, it is Navi Mumbai in Airoli, Hyderabad, and Pune in Kharadi and Yerwada. We do not think that the portfolio locations are any different from each other in the context of the type. Yes, there could be some difference in the type of occupiers that could occupy these spaces. It could be relatively more financial services in Mumbai versus more technology tenants in, say, Hyderabad. Having said that, in terms of the operations that these tenants conduct, these are core operations to each of these tenants, and we do not therefore foresee any difference in the outlook of these tenants towards these spaces. Additionally, these offices have remained operational across locations all throughout the pandemic virtually on a 24/7 basis, and the work from home is entirely enabled by these offices remaining operational, and therefore, by virtue of the fact that there is reasonable amount of presence in Navi Mumbai also is a core peripheral market to the Bombay in Mumbai. In fact, from a travel standpoint, reaching Navi Mumbai is nowadays much faster than reaching the western suburbs, most parts of western suburbs. So we would think that Navi Mumbai is an attractive market, and the rents are in the 50 to 650, 55 rupees handle, which also makes it extremely attractive with the kind of infrastructure that Mumbai offers.
Sure. Thank you. Just one last question in terms of what are the risks that one should keep in mind, if one is looking at entering at these levels.
So REITs are characterized and identical to equities, and hence would effectively be subject to the same kind of volatility on capital prices that one would see as being applicable to equities. So that is point one to note. The other risk which we covered earlier was what happens in the context of the office space outlook in the backdrop of work from home and so on. That is something that is relevant, but we've covered that. Eventually, if I think the bigger risk could be that if the COVID outlook really worsens, and it's not therefore something that is particularly relevant only for the office space, it's applicable to all sectors and industries that will operate in India. If COVID really intensifies, then an extended period of inoccupation, is something that one will have to bear in mind. At this point in time, clearly tenants have continued to pay rents. These areas are core to them. We do not think, however, that the pandemic should last beyond a period of time, but obviously that is a risk which is a clear extension of a black swan event. Additionally, in the office segment, what one generally sees is consolidation happens between different locations, and if certain locations are of more interest to occupiers, they may choose to vacate a particular location and consolidate in another location. So those kind of trends could continue to affect select assets, but in the context of diversified portfolios, hence which where a Mindspace has 23 million square foot of a completed portfolio, even if there is a vacation, right, by a tenant, it is not something that impacts the portfolio materially in that sense. So I would generally think that these are the key risks that one potentially would think about. More commercial.
And just one last question that we've been getting, this one question that a lot of people have asked, that can it be treated as a retirement vehicle, and can this be compared to holding real estate if one has a substantial capital to be allocated?
So personally, I would think that REITs are a much I institutionalized way of ownership of rent yielding assets. On an individual basis, I am aware that there have been substantial rental discussions. People have been forced to give rebates at this time, irrespective of whether the underlying tenant has got impacted or not. And that's a risk that one will always bear with direct real estate investing. So if one is contrasting to that, clearly REITs are a far more institutionalized way with a diversified holding, a strong asset management entity, dealing with all aspects that are relevant, a very strong MNC clientele. So to that extent, there's a strong diversification. I would think so that's broadly in context, but I would say from a retirement perspective, this is definitely something that can be used as one of the key constituents of a portfolio, which can provide yield, because an investment at the current price, the yield on this amount invested could keep increasing over a period of time. Obviously, one should monitor each investment like one would monitor any equity investment. But subject to that, I think this would be good fitment.
Great. This has been very helpful, Shailendra. Thank you. That is all that we have. All the questions. Over to you, Kritika.
Thank you, Akshay. Thank you, Shailendra. That was quite insightful. I would really like to thank you for giving such an in-depth session, and I'm sure everybody have enjoyed listening to your views. On behalf of our participants and Kotak Securities, I'd like to thank you for taking out your time.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.